Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Righto, good morning ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 5th of the Queensland Water Directorate's Essentials webinar series. Couple of great presenters coming up today, and I'll just quickly deal with the admin-y stuff. So we've, last week, for those who attended, you'll appreciate we had some dramas with the chat function here, and we're learning about this software, which is a bit different to MS Teams and all the 3 or 4 others that we're all using at the moment, in that it doesn't actually enable or allow people to chat with each other while the webinars are happening, because it's designed for more people and meant to be more manageable. But what we're going to do today is when questions are asked, Ryan's going to push them to the audience, so you'll at least see the question that's asked. We ask that you don't try to answer the question, because it just sort of increases the traffic. It's just there so you can see what's coming up and we can get them organised for the presenters. And it does give us the log that we then need to use to follow up with presenters after the event if we can't get to all of them. So I have just hit go on a little thing which says enter your questions here to the entire audience. So theoretically you should have a box show up which says questions/chat, and that should be where you get to enter your stuff. So just a quick plug again for our eFlash information and the COVID forum, our Zoho forum. If you haven't registered for them already, we haven't been adding a lot of new information to them this week, because I think as people would be aware, as travel restrictions start to ease, we're all gearing around working on recovery strategies, and we're talking to the New South Wales Water Directorate, government representatives and others on our strategy for that sort of stuff. Now that we've got a process running with these webinars, we've got storage of all the videos. So if you keep an eye on the eFlashes, you should see hyperlinks to currently just to a YouTube site where you can see the full recording. So if you're unable to attend one in person, we're going to keep them up there for the duration of the COVID management period, and then decide on how we're going to handle them sometime between now and the end of that. I'll just give you a plug for who's coming up in the next week or so. So next week we've got Hamish Butler, who's the Director of the Water Supply Regulator at the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy, who's going to talk about regulatory approaches in general, but also in particular their response to the COVID pandemic. And we've got Chris Manning from Townsville City Council presenting on the results of their council's collaboration with the CRC for water sensitive cities. So it's around Townsville's new water sensitive approach and maximising the significant investment in that region in water security. In following weeks, we're going to expect a similar presentation to Hamish's from the environmental regulator. So Chris Mooney's kindly agreed to speak. Some talks around condition assessment, old school condition assessment. Next week we've got Dean Barnett, who's the head of the Victorian Intelligent Water Networks, talking about technologies and collaborative projects that they've been running and opportunities for Queensland. And we've also got our TRG chair, Troy Prediford, doing a leadership presentation that he gave at our skills forum earlier in March, which was really well received, sort of a bit of a career journey for him and how it might be applicable and useful for your staff. So we've been asked to provide a repeat performance of that one, thanks to Troy. So without further ado, I would like to now hand over to Ramraj Kulkarni from Unitywater. So I'm sure most people attending would be aware that there's been lots of examples of wetland installations at STPs of varying types over a number of years, and not so many examples of successful ongoing programs due to maintenance issues and other things. But Ramraj has been leading a project at Kenilworth for a couple of years now with Unitywater, and it's a bit of an exciting and different approach to the wetlands treatment model. So I shall hand over to Ramraj, or Ryan shall hand over for me.
You're good to go, Ramraj.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to present about this innovative floating treatment wetlands concept, the trial that we had at Kenilworth. Well, I am more specifically on this nature-based solution for a small community at Kenilworth. Well, the purpose of this presentation is to present the data of this floating wetlands, which project is currently underway, though we have completed the trial just last week on the 30th of April. Through this presentation, I would be keen to discuss some of those key points like these. Are these floating wetlands, is it a novel approach to those wastewater treatment, especially for those rural communities that we serve? And how this nutrient sequestration occurs in those selected species, and the water quality improvements from an utility perspective. Perhaps I'll also touching base on a little bit on those best effluent management practice for wetlands. Through this presentation, I want to make sure that the figures and the data which are being presented will be the best guesses, or they are explanatory trends. But however, for a pond-based system that we have inculcated at Kenilworth, perhaps more keen overall intention is to present them as not make them as a facts or make a conclusion at this stage, because the trial has just recently ended, and more keen to share my experiences on this wetlands. Talking about Kenilworth, Kenilworth is a regional town. As some of you know, it's located in the hinterland in Queensland, 2 hours drive from Sunshine Coast. And talking about the population, it serves at around 350 EP, which is very small by 2020. And typically the sewage is of low to medium domestic strength. On the surrounds of the STP, it is full of agricultural land, forested surrounds, especially popular for those campers and also boat kayaking, as you can see on right some of those pictures. The flow to the STP would be at least 8 times of the flow that we get normally on a day-to-day basis. So there is weekend crowds and population at that location. The treatment plant, before delving into detail, it has gotten it sometimes discharges into the Beatty Creek under only high wet weather flow conditions, which again is a tributary to the Maryberry River. And from a tourism and agricultural perspective, Kenilworth STP is of utmost importance in terms of maintaining its license conditions and also public health and safety. Going into further detail of Kenilworth STP, before I touch upon the concept, it's a waste stabilization board system. There are 2 facultative ponds followed by a maturation pond in the end for treatment. Typically, if I go back, in any of those sewage treatment plants, it's all about nutrients in and nutrients out, and some of the nutrients that are being metabolized by microbes, which are my good friends actually. To say that, let us imagine for a while if these ponds are have very high surface area, or if there is higher retention time or pond water saturation, stagnation. So this leads to sometimes secondary release of nutrients in the pond, which is what we have been seeing at Kenilworth, that the terminal lagoon, as you see in the picture, was showing higher levels of nutrients and also some displayed high pH and suspended solids. So when there is a combination of nutrients released and with sunlight, and we all know that it's again algal bloom. So that you can see some at the pond inlet. I can see that some of those surface algal blooms, though it will be rampant during certain time of the year. So gradually it's a natural reoccurring purpose. So in order to find out a solution for this, we went in for a nature-based solution, which is nothing but floating wetlands. So for a nature-bound issues, I can say here, as you could see that there are 4 pontoons, which basically constitute those floating wetlands. Each one of them had a different species like carex, phragmites, etc. Perhaps I would say that a pre-trial of that was done in our case in order to establish which could be the best species. Of the 10 species, we arrived at 4. and which was taken up into the trial. And in terms of those floating wetlands, here the concept is slightly different. Like we used these co-joined molds, which had the facility, like which had the baskets, like baskets are having sporia, which in turn the plants are being planted into that. So from a maintenance perspective, though I can say that they are slightly different from the conventional, but all other systems do work. In terms of the sampling points throughout this trial, yeah, you can see those red dots, which are like inlet and outlet at each of the pontoon, and a final effluent release point, which is actually a pump, and then which pumps into a rainwater tank, which is the typically used effluent pump stations for our license requirements. On the background, the most of the effluent goes to the vetiver grass, which in turn overflows at the back to the creek, as I said in the previous slide. Going to the concept, floating wetlands, yeah, it's just mimicking some of the nature, some of the surface flow wetlands, like wherein plants are grown on an artificial engineered medium, wherein nutrients are being either absorbed or absorbed by the roots of the biomass, which in turn, through a process of adsorption or biosorption, and then the final effluent is much more clear. They are being designated as nature's kidneys, Goode. But I would say that in terms of its maintenance, they are definitely low technology solution, because it doesn't need much of those operator input while operating those plants. Once the macrophytes are being planted on a stable bioend structure, they just tend to grow in those water column or the medium. I can show some pictures, like in terms of our the floating wetlands, the root biomass which has grown in some of those crates, wherein which increases, which due to its surface area increase, we see a lot of microbiofilm, which in turn helps in reducing the nutrients or to trap the suspended solids. And plant uptake and fertilization is a function of, to me, surface area available for the plants. Application of these floating wetlands, well, I can say that they can be typically be used at stormwater, wastewater, but they are case specific because each conditions vary, because we work in an environment which is nutrient rich in case of wastewater ponds. Mitigating coastal riverbanks, again, it's case by cases, because there has to be looked into those safety and other aspects. Providing or enhancing habitat, though this is not one of our objectives, but however, what we noticed at site was during those implementation, one of those masked lagoons had laid its eggs on the pontoons, as you can see that. And we had to, of course, build a separate bridge for its exit from for the chicks to exit from that floating pontoons. So these are one of those site conditions that we normally don't envisage. And in terms of its advantage, I can say that yeah, we didn't use any further land or this one, but it was being rather fit up in the existing pontoon pond. Self-sustaining, talking about there is no use of chemicals or power, but I am not disappointing anyone. We do use some of those pumps and pipes in the treatment plant, not in the wetlands, but however in the treatment plant. It definitely adds to an enhanced or upgrade in the treatment with the available footprint. So I'll touch base about these results, which has been for almost now close to 16-18 months of the trial. So as you can see that, as I said, that with the establishment of the floating wetlands, the suspended solids was the first concern for us, which was as high as I could see that some of those species with 300 or 350 at the beginning. So there was a rapid decline in those values of those suspended solids, which again was because of process which the Mother Nature helped us in getting reducing the algal growth or the suspended solids or the pH. Perhaps this was much more specifically emphasized through the installation of those floating covers, which were being installed in between those pontoons. I think I should have said it in my first slide. So this has been continuous, and as we could see that most of the results that we get are within those bandwidth of the license compliance in terms of the maximum and the long-term license limits. Coming to the second, this one, turbidity is again a function of suspended solids, which again showed a gradual trend, and further it stabilized in terms of its readings actually in the last probably 8-9 months. pH, yeah, this is one significant factor which amazed me with this treatment option, was that the pH dropped down because there was competition which was being created for the algal growth, which in turns, like, the plants use some of the nutrients in the effluent, and also the floating towers try to suppress the sunlight, or sunlight penetration, which helped in lowering the algal count, which I have got separate results on that. And this, there are some novel experiences wherein algal growth releases some of the carbon dioxide, and which again increases the pH. This, however, we can see that it dropped down in the initial stages. And also, to add to that, it is also a function of sunlight, time, temperature, and the season of the month. So that is where I could see that we did compare this with another gray line, which you can see, it was those pre-trial monthly readings, which are for the past 7-8 years, and there was a gradual decrease of 1 unit, probably half a unit to 1 unit in the pH of that of the treatment effluent. In terms of the configuration, which I mentioned here, we did trial some few configurations down the line in terms of the trial agreement. So the configuration 1 had 4 separate one, where the configuration 2 had 2 combining 2 floating wave pontoons, and then though it showed some results, but however we changed it to the configuration of late very recently. So biological results, or the BOD, again you can see that there is a trend in lowering its own in its value, and perhaps configuration 2 has gotten better results than the previous one, and definitely we are well below the median limits. Nutrients, this is one element of this trial, was to reduce the nutrients. Again, from as a start from the beginning, it was in the high ranges of 30-35, which was because of the secondary release, and further this can be seen as a downward trend in terms of its nutrients. Though for us the parameter has been the TKN, or the total genital nitrogen, which we are much more concerned, which we are analyzing currently. Phosphorus is another nutrient actually, but this shows a variable result. Perhaps I would say that as we all, I would like to give a reason here that the phosphorus did go to an increasing trend, like in the initial stages. And historically, if we see from the previous test data or something, there is always that phosphorus keeps building in the system, because to add to that, the scientific reason, or some of the reason, are that most of the phosphorus would be embedded, or would settle at the bottom because of the coagulation, or with the algal solids, or any of the biological solids. But now with the reduction in those algal count, so the free phosphorus is much more available in the system. So that is where there could be a sense of trend, in an increasing trend in terms of the total phosphorus. And again, to add to that, we need to perhaps concentrate on those orthophosphates, which we are also analyzing. That's the key for assessing its nutrients removal capacity. To share some of those experience or lessons learned, we did have some of those algal growth in the past, from those that require special attention while installing these wetlands. So what it means is there could be an issue of, as you could see, some dead biomass of growth of those algae or something underneath the floating pontoons, which creates some sort of buoyancy issues. There could be some buoyancy issues, and which could even retard the growth of the plants. The contact of sewage with the root system, these could be certain issues. So in that way, I would suggest that, okay, in terms of coverage of the area, and this one, the floating covers can be done first, and then install those floating wetlands as we see that there is minimal regrowth of the algal, this one, or which doesn't affect the buoyancy. We had some clever ideas in this pontoon, which enabled us to bounce back in terms of those buoyancy issues. Plant biomass is definitely a critical issue or component of this nutrient sequestration, as I said, in terms of those grams per square meters or grams per meter square per year, or per whatever length of the trial. Because at this point of time, we did monitor those shoot biomass, root structures through the trial. There is no, I'll say, novel evidence to critically establish that which species has the most, the potential to have those secretive hormones or compounds that relate to the growth or that relates to the retardation of the algal population, or to the in terms of the reduction of the pH or the nutrients. Perhaps I'll discuss about those two standard species which has helped us in terms of its plant growth, means physical growth, both shoot as well as root biomass. Through this trial, we noticed that the results can be variable because it can be anywhere. It is not necessary to have a preconceived idea in terms of its performance, because this is an ongoing learning process, and it needs a thorough statistic analysis to come out with the effectiveness of the floating wetlands, and which we are currently doing as part of this final reporting. While adapting this type of system in terms of nutrient treatment, it is always challenging to it is difficult to change the pond metabolism, or challenging in terms of its functionality. Perhaps we can little bit alter in terms of its pond biology. Especially this, to me, required certain involvement from a microbiologist. This was the key which I found, and also nursery specialist. Water quality as a sole metric, definitely this is one which utility would look for. Perhaps, as I said, it gives us variable results initially, but a controlled test medium is needed to really compare like to like. While talking about the maintenance, we have been having it almost for now 16 months. We have done practically a pruning of this one once, so which could mean to say that if it is in its maturity stage and all, it could take at least once in a 6 months or 9 months to really prune some of those grown plants. But on the other hand, there is always a need to be a little bit conscious of the plant mortality. On an average, it could be around 5 to 10%, which needs to be replanted as part of this maintenance program. Perhaps more to say that the operator was we had frequent visits of the operator during this trial, plus the contractors. So there was continuous monitoring from our end to make sure that the plant health or plants, this one is being critically monitored. There is a suggestion to have remote sensing, but however, I would rather prefer the frequent site visits, which would be much more useful in case of the rural sites. Though we try to put in more the timing cameras and try to monitor those growth, but it is a bit hard to capture those results or the physical growth. There is another factor, with the surface area, we had noticed that wind plays a significant factor in terms of the samples, because a sample which is being collected meters apart can give you a different value. Further from a project experience perspective, I can say that we need to add sometimes 20 to 30% extension on this end date, because these are nature-based solutions which cannot be controlled by time, which though it is by and large dependent on temperature, wind, sunlight, climatic conditions, weather. Yeah, these are all some of the issues, and certainly allow for some things like IP related in the beginning itself to make sure that things would work easily for anyone who want to work on the innovation project. Do help all your contractors who are out there. Do not hinder yourselves. Maintaining sort of a working relationship, because this is a project which involves not just engineering skills, but also microbiologists, nursery specialists, local site conditions. So all those factors need to be looked into. This is where we had those options to reduce those further maintenance issues by backing up in the initial stage itself. So we took almost 4 to 5 months to prepare a business case preparation, for the reason that we wanted to have full enough information on the proof of concept, plus the maintenance, plus how we are going to execute the project. This did help us in our experience with the floating wetlands. From an
excuse me, Ramraj, we've probably only got a minute or two, mate. We just.
Oh, I think I'm just done. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I'm just done. Yeah, design reports. Yeah, just please do not refer to those wherever reference come, but because the conditions do change. And summary, that's the summary which I would like to say that yes, it's definitely a low-tech engineering solution which we have found. And positives, yeah, nutrients reduction in algal growth, pH have occurred. Nutrients uptake is promising, which is of the area of 120 grams per meter square for the 8 months of duration. Exceptionally, what I've seen, Bormia and Phragmites are the well-grown species out of the 4. The benefit which we see in evaporation is less pumping, less O&M. Further analysis or the final reporting will will definitely contribute about it. The concept contributes in terms of reduction of pH, suspended solids, nitrogen removal. There has been low or minimal impact on this and onto the river as well as to the agriculture and tourism valleys. So we'll be concluding this. We have concluded the trial. Full results or a final report is due in May, June 2020. So I think I would like to sum it up saying that I have all the acknowledgement to all the people involved in this project, without which I would have not achieved these much results. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ramraj. So please show your appreciation for Ramraj by raising your hands. And if you've got any questions, please type them in. We'll try to get through as many as we can in the next 5 minutes or so. A couple to kick you off, Ramraj. I just raised one that I sent to the group about other trials which have existed in SEQ and reporting problems with turtles eating plant roots, and just wondered if, whilst it's early days yet, I guess, for your installation, have you come across those sorts of issues?
In fact, we had a fair idea of the turtles inside, and we did put up those turtle netting as part of the design. Excellent.
All right, so the next one's from Paul Sherman. Does the zone in the water around the roots become depleted of oxygen? We work with duckweed in the water column. It was depleted of oxygen, and before discharge, we were required to aerate the water to discharge conditions.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with that, because we also saw a drop in dissolved oxygen, and however, this was being countered by those floating covers which had some penetration holes. So it's a combination of aeration and re-aeration. So I would suggest that, always please watch out for some of those concepts of re-aerating the system.
Okay, next one's asking what plants you're using. You might have already covered this, I'm not sure. The suggestion is, are they targeted for nitrogen uptake, for example, Carex oppressor?
Yes, we have used Carex. They were especially targeted for Carex, Phragmites, Bomia, and Vechuer. So they were targeted based on the literature search in terms of the nutrients removal. Yeah.
Okay, was it necessary to protect vetiver grass from birds?
It's necessary, yeah, but in our case we didn't find much of the birds. We had some bird nesting as part of the scope, but however, with our information on, or being on the site for almost 10 years now, so we took a decision of not putting up the bird netting. Yeah.
All right, so there's two more, and we might make these the last two, but by all means keep typing them in if you'd like us to follow up with Ramraj later. So deepening along the bottom of the lagoon.
We do get some short circuiting because of wind movement, and also because what we have been noticing is we did a trial with a remote sensing sludge monitoring equipment. However, we noticed that the sludge actually moves at the middle of the pond rather than onto the sides. So I have got some 3D graphs, 3D diagrams of the sludge movement. So this was part of another project which we did at Kenilworth. Yeah.
Does the above water biomass vegetation require maintenance or removal at any stage?
I think it is too early for me to say, because in the last 18 months I've seen that not the plants which have not really grown well, we did change them in the end. So that is where I'm saying that with the selected species of Bomia or Phragmites, we aren't noticing much of those except pruning. There is not much further changes in terms of its growth, because I'm seeing that there is a second growth now which is happening, which, as I said, 5 to 10% is always something which we have to look into, the mortality of those plants. Yeah.
All right, excellent. So we'll wind it up there. Ramraj, thank you very much. It's a bit like an interrogation, isn't it? You can imagine you being in the spotlight. We're trying to do all this quickly to keep the whole thing within an hour. Some rapid fire questions, but you've done extremely well. Please raise your hands again in appreciation for Ramraj, and we'll get on to the next presenter.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. All right, so there's no polls this week for those who've participated previously. We just couldn't think of any good ones, basically, but they will come back. We have resolved the technical issues that we were having with polls. So we'll just focus on questions for now. So our next presenter is James Goode from the Water Services Association of Australia on asbestos pipes best practice guidelines, particularly for water networks. And rather than let James go full tilt straight away, we've lined up Stephen Martin from Townsville City Council to help set the scene for the need for guidelines and consistency in approaches. Steve's just going to give you a quick 5 minutes on the significant challenges faced, or the significant AC challenges faced by his council. So I'll hand over to Steve.
Thanks. Can everyone see the screen? I don't want to take up too much time, but basically Townsville is currently has about 794 kilometres of AC mains left in the network. We have been actively trying to replace AC mains over the last 4 or 5 years, but we still have that much. That's roughly 30% of our water network is still AC. But they're currently, they account for about 38% of main breaks. As I say, the majority of breaks come during or immediately following a wet season, so with ground movement, especially, we find them. And you can see down the bottom there the number of AC breaks that we've been having over the last few years, and it's still increasing even though we've been actively replacing as many as we can. A lot of this goes back to what I call the bathtub curve, and basically we find that we're in this the top end where we are getting consistent failures in AC mains, and therefore we're going to get increasing numbers of them. So there's this bow wave of breaks that are staring us in the face. What we've actually found with the AC mains is, but it'll all depend on the who laid them, how well they laid them, what ground conditions that they're in. And so now, if we start getting breaks in a certain subdivision area, and we know that subdivision has all been laid at around that same time by the same set of contractors, etc., we are going to experience breaks in that area. So we try and proactively go through and replace all of them. Typically in the past we use the same, if we've had 3 breaks in the street, we'll replace that street. With AC mains, we've found that we can't do that because it'll be three breaks in that street this week, 5 in the street next to it the week after, and so forth. So we need to proactively get in there and replace them. One of the other problems that we found with the older AC mains as well is the unlined fittings that go with them, and that creates another problem in its own. So again, we're trying to target some of the older mains that we get. That's about our profile that we have here in Townsville. The data's a little bit skewed because these 2 high ones around about 80 something plus and 140 plus is because we didn't actually know the age of the main, and somebody just put in a figure. Similarly with the blue line, which is the breaks, you'll see right on 70 years of age. There's a majority of them have been put in at 70. That's because the guys didn't know what the age of the main was when they put them in. But in general, you can see that it doesn't really matter about the age of the main as to where the breaks are happening. It all depends on, again, the ground conditions, how they've been laid, and who laid them is probably the bigger factor. And that's just one of our nice little ones that we had. And I'll now hand over to the main presenter.
Great, thanks, Steve. So our over to James. Fire away, James, and we'll sort out some questions at the end. Steve, you get the privilege of asking the first one, so I hope you got it ready.
Okay.
So I hope everyone can see my screen okay. Just checking that before I start. Is that all right?
Yep, you're good.
David?
Yep, we're good, mate.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Steve. And it's always good to get some context for a presentation and hear about the issues that
Sorry, James, I'm
people
just
have.
letting you know we're seeing your note slide and the black screen rather than the main one. But as long as you're not worried about people seeing your notes, it should be fine.
Right, I should be able to fix that. How's that? Is it still showing the black one? Or
It's still the same, mate, but I wouldn't worry too much about it
right.
at this point.
We'll just get going.
Thank you.
So what I can do. So yes, I'm here today to talk about the work that WAS has been doing with the Asbestos Safety and Eradication Agency on some best practice guidelines for managing asbestos cement water pipes. I'm the Asset Management Program Coordinator with WASA. What that means is I get involved in asset management issues all the way from dams through to water meters, and in this case, including asbestos cement water pipes. Just a little bit about my history, so I don't get too many technical questions. I'm not an expert on asbestos cement pipes. I have worked at a water utility down in Melbourne called Yarra Valley Water, where I have managed renewals programs, both from construction and from the asset management perspective. So that's the direction I'm coming at this from. I'm not a technical expert on the health and safety issues of asbestos cement pipes. The objective of today is to talk about the Water Pipes Working Group that AZ has set up, present the work completed to date, including key risks, and talk a little bit about WAS's position and desires. So ASIA is the Asbestos Safety Eradication Agency. This is a federal organisation that was established to deliver the National Strategic Plan for Asbestos Management and Awareness. In effect, what they're there to do, and the second point there, is prevent exposure to asbestos fibres in order to eliminate asbestos-related disease in Australia. So that's the aim. As part of doing their work, they became aware of asbestos water pipes and sewer pipes. The first thing they did was undertake some case studies. So you can see the 6 utilities that were involved in those case studies right across the nation. The basic findings from those case studies were that water authorities are pretty much doing a good job. There was a bit of a big tick here for us. Water authorities have long-term strategies in place for managing asbestos pipe. And the water authorities have all the policies and procedures necessary and are supported by documentation and clear accountability for managing asbestos water pipe. However, they did identify some areas for improvement. One, on the communication of the asbestos cement pipe issue. And secondly, they identified opportunity for further research. This is in regards to legislation and how that applies to asbestos cement water pipes. What the legacy risk, and I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail actually, but suffice to say that there was areas for further research on the management of asbestos cement pipes. To facilitate this, ASIA created the WPWG, which is the Water Pipes Working Group, and they had a number of objectives. I'm just going to summarise them up here for you. The first thing was to develop a long-term strategy for safe management, removal, transport and disposal of water pipes containing asbestos. The second thing was to develop best practice management guidelines, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. Thirdly, they want to provide a forum to facilitate and share research and identify gaps. And lastly, to facilitate understanding of current legislative requirements and identify gaps in legislation. The members, a broad range of members. You can see WASO down the bottom. We've got the ACTU, but primarily the members here are the environmental protection agencies and the health and safety agencies. I know we've probably got a number of councils on the line. One stakeholder is missing. I think they were invited, but is algal, and we're been very upfront saying that they need to be consulted as part of this process. And I think ASIA is working on that. algal being the associated local government authority. From WASO's perspective, there was myself involved, plus 3 utility representatives, Steve Nash from Golden Valley Water, Mike Stokes from South East Water, and Kim Bancroft from Urban Utilities in Queensland. So these are my words. What I was hoping to get out of this process was best value risk reduction for the community. So guidelines that develop best value risk reduction, but also to give both regulators and utilities confidence in the processes we're using to manage asbestos cement water pipe. Now, at this point, you'll notice that I'm using the words water pipe. The scope of this project was asbestos cement water pipe. It did not include sewer pipe, and I've received quite a bit of feedback about that. I do want to talk about sewer pipe later on in my presentation. But the major reason that it focused on water pipe and not sewer pipe is just the number, the quantities. Our estimation is there's over 40,000 kilometres of water pipe in the country, whereas there's probably closer to 4,000 kilometres of sewer pipe in the country. So, but I will talk about sewer pipe a bit later. The Water Pipes Working Group developed a plan. There's 6 steps. I'll talk about these a bit further. These 6 steps were intended all to go towards the 7th step, which is the best practice guidelines. The tasks 1 and 2. This was a scan of legislation and practices. So one of the biggest concerns coming from the water industry is that a lot of the legislation for asbestos management is really aimed at the building industry and may not be all that appropriate to the water industry. Also, every state and territory has their own laws regulating asbestos, and there's going to be some differences there. So ASIA did a pretty good job on this. They scanned all the legislation from environmental legislation and safety legislation, and talked about the impact of the relevant clauses on asbestos water pipe management. That include management of in-use water pipe, transport, removal and disposal, demolition and storage. The third task was assessment of legacy risks. So this is just investigating what the risks are from asbestos cement water pipe, both live asbestos cement water pipe and abandoned and pipe cracked asbestos cement water pipe. That process then went through looking at how it's currently controlled, what are the risk gaps and possible solutions. And that also is fed into the best practice guidelines. Activities 4 and 5. This is work that WASA primarily undertook. So there's been a lot of research done on the health impacts of asbestos water pipe. There's been research done on how friable the pipe is, both in Australia and the US. So we gathered that together into one document, and then we summarised it. And how we summarised it was to say, is there enough research to allow the water industry to adequately manage the risk of exposure when asbestos cement water pipes are allowed to remain in the ground? We said, okay, is there enough research on best practices for remediation and stabilisation? And lastly, we said, where are the items we need to better inform future practices? Oops. Let's go back. In summary, it's WASA's position that there's been enough research done to justify allowing asbestos cement water pipes to remain in the ground. Asbestos water pipes are non-friable in nature. They're buried, and when they're left in the ground, that risk is managed by the water utility. And we think that's adequate, and that's been our position, and I'll talk about that a bit more. However, we did think that priority 2 and priority 3 could do with some work, and that there could be better information on best practices, and that there could be more work done on future practices. So WASA has been working on priority 2 with ASIA, and WASA is working separately on priority 3. We are doing some work on identifying and prioritising asbestos pipes for replacement. The last task was a series of case studies. Steve Nash from Golden Valley Water did this work, just to understand what's happening out there in real life. So Steve Nash went to a number of New South Wales authorities, primarily the smaller council authorities, Riverina Council being an example. And here's an example of an issue, a long length of asbestos cement pipe in pretty much a rural area. In this case, the pipe was bypassed and replaced offline. And you can see some of the key learnings that they had. The importance of recording accurately, the importance of installing signage at the road crossings where people might be exposed to the abandoned asbestos cement pipe. The communication was critical, and that all exposed and broken sections of AC pipeline were to be removed during the project. And a lot of these key learnings from the case studies, again, have been incorporated into the best practice guidelines. So as I mentioned, our current view is there's sufficient research to support abandoned AC water pipes remaining in the ground. And I'm not going to hide behind this fact. This is because of a cost reason. And it's primarily, there's a little bit of safety with this, with construction workers being exposed to AC pipes being pulled out. But the primary reason we're taking this position is cost to the community. There's a big cost in transporting and taking these asbestos pipes to a licensed waste disposal place. As mentioned before, there's still work to be done on best management practices and communication. Some of the risks from that position, it's very important when we're doing these guidelines that communication to the community is part of it. If we are going to support leaving asbestos cement pipes in the ground, the community needs to be informed and be comfortable with it. We need to work with our stakeholders, particularly the EPA, the councils and the safety authorities. There's one key risk here with leaving asbestos pipe in the ground, and that's the definition of asbestos waste. I'll highlight the red parts of that slide. So pretty much, this is New South Wales. It does different in different states. Any discarded, rejected, unwanted, surplus or abandoned substance is defined as waste. And the second red point, a substance is not precluded from being waste for the purposes of this Act merely because it's been processed, recycled, or maybe, processed, recycled, reused or recovered. So that was a key risk. Okay, the guidelines. The guidelines have been drafted. It's about a 6-page document. The structure, it talks about considerations when working with asbestos, maintenance, management, sampling and testing, and renewal. It does talk about management of abandoned pipes, but that's kind of incorporated within those major headings. It references legislation and how that applies. It includes case studies, and there's a key points section. We have drafted a checklist / flowchart. Currently, that's not included in the guidelines, but we're requesting that it does get included just to assist those who work in the vicinity of asbestos cement water pipes, to help them identify the risks and how they should be addressing the risks. So the key points of the guidelines, some of this is common sense, but risk must be reduced as far as reasonably practical. And that's following the standard risk hierarchy, elimination, substitution. People are aware of that hierarchy. In the guidelines, they have stated that intact, disused AC pipe is not considered waste. So this gives a bit of confidence for utilities who want to do bypass renewal as a technique for replacing their asbestos cement pipes. They have said that pipe cracking asbestos does create asbestos waste. So I haven't intended to fight with the ASIA or the regulators, but at this point we're saying that pipe cracking is not really appropriate for replacing asbestos waste unless you're there's no other alternative. And asbestos pipe remains the responsibility of the Water Authority in perpetuity. This is a bit of an interesting one, particularly when it comes to the safety element of AC pipe. And the example I'd like to give is a water utility leaves asbestos pipe in the road reserve. Often, if that road needs to be widened, it'll be part of the road widening project to remove that abandoned asbestos cement pipe. We think that's not fair, and we believe water utilities have a responsibility to make that situation safe for anybody that works in the vicinity, and that would be including removing that abandoned AC pipe. The best practice guidelines aren't quite there yet. There are some concerns. Apparently, any asbestos waste prior to 2003 can be managed. Asbestos waste after that should be removed. Now, the water industry has been pipe cracking asbestos cement pipe for long after 2003. In Victoria, which is my home state, it was abandoned in 2015. So that means there's 12 years of pipe cracked pipe, which is in a bit of limbo. So that needs to be addressed. There's an issue around certifying land once AC pipe is removed. Land needs to be certified that asbestos is removed. We think that should be done by a Class B assessor rather than Class A because of the non-friable nature. And we also need clarification on sampling. That's just a minor one. I need to speed up a bit. AC sewer pipes. So that's clearly not in the scope. And we've received a lot of feedback about concern with jetting AC sewer pipes. The fact is we have an opportunity here. We have a forum with health and safety regulators and environmental protection regulators. We're going to work hard to see if we can use the working pipe working group to assist with this issue. The next steps, we've had the feedback AG is reviewing all the comments from the Working Pipes Working Group. These best practice guidelines will go out for public consultation in June, July. In September, we'll review the public comments, and in November, they hope to publish the guidelines. There we go, that's the presentation. Dave, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Excellent.
Yeah, James, Steve Martin. I've got a bit of concern about this best practice of leaving the pipes in the ground, especially in the CBD area, where other authorities then use that conduit for their purposes, and I'm talking about NBN and anybody else, the Telstra and so forth, that are going to go along there. Is any consideration given to that sort of thing?
So we're not saying that leaving the pipe in the ground is best practice. We just want to have some confidence if that option is chosen, that the water utility won't be held accountable for removing that at a later date. We also think that where the risk is okay, so we're talking, if we're in nature strips, if we're in rural areas, there's a number of situations where it just makes sense to pick it up in a GIS and leave it there. And if anyone works in that area, they should be going through the dial before you dig, particularly in a public road, that the water utility should be making it safe before those people work in that area. We think that makes sense. Now, there's a number of areas where it's risky. And the CBD might be a good example, Steve. Where asbestos pipe is in private property, we think that's a real risk and should be removed from private property. Where there's inadequate cover, we think it should be removed as well, or at least the cover increased. So that's our thoughts. As I mentioned today, this is a work in progress. I'm not going to have all the answers. If I've got something wrong here, please let me know. But hopefully through the checklist and the risk guidelines, that those kind of concerns will be addressed.
And James, are they going to recommend the sort of minimum PPE that's required for people working on asbestos cement mains? Was that part of the scope?
They haven't gone into that kind of detail. They talk about the training. They talk about their application legislation, but they don't say no. Don't go into that kind of detail. No. Is that something that people would like? The other thing that WAS is keeping in mind too is there may be, because there's a little bit high level, there may be an element of detail that's missing. So WASA is considering whether we might need to do a bit of an addendum to provide that detail to the guidelines and share that with our members. At this point, we're going through the guideline process first, so we can get included in there, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, James, I might just run through a few of the other questions that have popped up before we wrap up. Yep. So I think the first one is probably a comment. So Murray Thompson, g'day Murray, how you going, has raised the issue about potential exposure of workers to asbestos fibres while using high pressure water jetting for the cleaning of AC sewer pipes. So you've been fairly clear that sewer pipes are out of scope of this initial piece of work. So I guess rather than a question, it's probably a vote for that's an issue that people are grappling with. So, you know, restating what you said, the New South Wales Water Directorate and others had raised, there are concerns from several parties about the management of slurry and aerosols around jetting activities in sewer networks. So the next one, are the draft guidelines currently publicly available? Again, I think you've been clear that it's within your WASA reference group now. So I guess from the Queensland Water Directorate's perspective, is if you'd like us to try to find some some key bods to provide input or review, we're happy to help corral that sort of process to give you I guess, a Queensland-centric view of what the issues might be. But when would you expect the broader consultation? You had a timeline in your slides. Are you planning on going out more broadly in any time soon?
Yes, it's June, July.
Yep.
The public consultation. Look, having said that, there's a meeting on the 27th of May where the Water Pipes Working Group will be coming together and just confirming. I'm kind of viewing that as a late opportunity to give some early feedback. So if people want to nominate themselves as being interested in reviewing them, I can't see a problem with me giving out the draft guidelines to those. I don't want to put it publicly, but if people have an interest, then I'm happy to send them.
You don't want to hurt too many cats. So I guess anyone who's online who's interested, if you want to drop me a note and say you're interested in it, we'll just create a little reference group to distribute and share the guidelines with, and we'll collate some feedback for James's benefit if you want to stick your hand up. Thanks for that. So I'll keep going. So what are your thoughts on relining techniques as an option for renewal of AC water pipes? And we were hoping to hit you up for a presentation on that down the track with another webinar, James. So did you want to comment on the CRCP project or anything?
Yeah, so thanks. I'm glad you asked that question because I did forget to mention it. So WAS is undertaking a research project on liners, and that's partly been driven by the concern with the management of asbestos cement pipe and issues such as what Steve raised, that asbestos cement pipes are, it's not just Townsville, they're all across the country. They're failing at a rapid rate. So if one of the best ways of managing asbestos cement pipes is to just line it and reuse it. So WAS is doing a lot of work on testing a range of cured in place liners and spray liners to give the industry confidence about the use of these. Personally, I think it's a great solution if we can. It's just giving people confidence that these things will last 25, 50 years and that they can justify, because generally they cost more than, say, bypass replacement. So it's giving people confidence that when they invest a little bit more money, that it's value for money.
Excellent, thank you. So we might need to wrap it up shortly, but just in closing, I guess the rest of them aren't so much questions as comments and things that we can refer to you. So there's been a couple of references to Queensland legislation, generally, supporting the leave in the ground option, and there's another comment there about it being safest and cheapest option and so on. So generally supporting the position that WAS appears to have been taken. And the only other one, hang on, there's one more at the end. So there's a comment here saying some steel mains historically were wrapped in Class A friable asbestos. Asbestos removal specialists must be engaged to remove it. Geez, that sounds like fun. And okay, one last question. Yeah. One last question, then we'll wrap it up. So do the guidelines go into detail on using high pressure water vac truck for removal of dirt around broken AC mains, as this is potentially using high pressure water on AC material? So again, that's related to the sewage cleaning question and dealing with the slurry as well, but I hadn't thought about it in relation to water. So is it getting to that level of specifics, I guess?
It does. It actually says you should not be using high pressure in the vicinity of AC material. It's very clear about that. And that's why, as part of doing this, I think WASA and my working group needs to address this issue with the sewer pipes, because it could be very easily taken that, well, why can't you use jetting on? Why are you allowed to use jetting on sewer pipes? You're not allowed to use it on water pipes. So it needs to be addressed.
All right. So for those remaining, please show your appreciation for James taking the time to prepare and present by raising your hands. We'll wind it up there. and I look forward to catching up with you next week when we've got the presentation from the water supply regulator, Hamish Butler, the director of that group, and Chris Manning from Townsville City Council on water sensitive cities. So thank you. Have a good week.
Thanks.